If you can time it really well, and you have 3 or 4 weeks of a nice flow and really good hot weather, as soon as that honey's capped off, get it out and extract it, because it'll be the thickest honey that you've got. Okay, so just have a think about that as far as what weather conditions are and if you're setting up hives for honey. When you're bottling your honey, try and pour the honey down the inside of the jar without actually trying to add too much air into it. So this is, I'm getting into the point now where you've actually decided, I'm going to put some honey in jars and then I'll judge these jars for the show, okay? And then the other thing is, honey is very hygroscopic, so it will absorb moisture. A good honey is around 17% moisture. So if has the opportunity, say a day like today where it's quite humid outside and you've got an open jar of honey there, if you left it sit there all day, did a moisture test in the morning, another one in the afternoon, it will have absorbed moisture out of the air over the day, and that will then give you a less dense honey, so it's not as thick as the other jars. So get it in the jars and get the lids on as quick as you can. It doesn't have to be, really fast, but don't let it sit around for an hour or two. Once we've got to the point where we're going to actually do some entries, so careful extraction sort of goes without saying. You don't want to destroy frames. You don't want to be sort of squeezing honey out of wax to put in jars, because it gets very difficult to clean. A good fine sieve, so 400 microns is about the standard for honey. For sieving, you can go a little bit finer than that for show honey. Somewhere down around the 300 micron mark will actually just give you that clearer honey that you're looking for the show. Okay. Again, 500 gram jars down the inside edge. Really critical one. When you line up your jars, and most shows will have, okay, you've got to enter 2 jars or 3 jars, or in the commercial side of things, they might say you've got to put in 5 jars of a honey, is make sure they're all filled to the same level. Important thing. And all jars have a neck on them, and any impurities in that honey will rise and generally accumulate where that neck is, transition from the bigger diameter of the jar into the neck. So just have a look around that area there, and if there is any bits and pieces, you can get them out of the jar before you actually put it in the show. So you want to fill it to just to the underside of the cap, so maybe 3 or 4 millimetres lower than what the actual underside of the cap is. Because if you jar on a cold day and you're entering the Royal Easter Show, which generally the entries go in February, late February, early March, which can be very, very warm, the honey will have expanded in the jar, and it may rise up and actually touch the underside of the lid, and when you take the lid off, the actual underside of the lid is covered in honey, and judges don't like that. It's messy, so good thing to do. Keep it down a little bit, allow room for expansion. Also, once you've jarred your honey, and if the day that you're taking it down to enter it, the morning before you take it down, just flip all the lids off and have a look at what's sitting on the surface of the honey in that jar. And you can use a toothpick or something like that. If there's any bits and pieces, just to take them off, then put your lids back on, so that when the judges take the lid off the jar, they don't see wax or pollen or whatever floating on top of the honey. Why does it float on top of the honey? Honey's very heavy. It's 1.4, specific gravity of 1.4, so it's 1.4 kilos to the litre. Okay, so virtually anything in honey will float to the surface. Apart from gold, if you've got some gold, then that's okay. Honey will change colour in daylight, so keep your honey in a box, something along those lines that your entries are in. You might prepare your entries in January, and it might not need to go in until February, so keep your honeys in a box, keep them out of the direct sunlight. And again, read the schedule. The schedule is, I don't know where it came from, but LAW law, that is the schedule, okay? And make sure you're entered in the correct categories, critical things. So a couple of tips on different things. So comb honey, which is a frame of comb, it can be an ideal, WSP, Manly, deep frame, depending on what the schedule asks for. So if you're looking for a comb honey to put in a show, Put in a brood box, or sorry, a honey super directly above the queen excluder. Don't put it right up the top of the hive where the bees are going backwards and forwards and really little legs going over, little feet going over it all the time, so it will make the actual cappings dirty, okay? And also the excluder reduces the amount of potential pollen, etc. that's put in the frame. So a couple of little tips on frames of honey. That frame there is not a great one for a show, but we're looking for frames that are drawn all over. So highest points for totally capped frame. So colour of the cappings, we want it to be, the judges like it to be as white as possible in colour. And a little note there that probably not too many people know, we have basically two species of European honeybees. We've got Italian bees and we've got Russian bees, and the Russian bees are the Caucasian bees, and they actually cap earlier than what our Italian bees do, which gives you a whiter capping because the honey in the cell is not actually in contact with the capping, okay? So if you do frames of honey for a show, if you've got some Caucasian or Russian bees, which are the black honeybees or darker coloured honeybees, they're the way to go for comb, okay? So you want a nice even surface on your frame of comb. Capping's all the same colour, and importantly, the honey in the frame needs to be the same colour. You don't want honey in there that is from two different floral sources. So you might have a dark on one end and a light on the other end. Okay, so creamed honey. I have entered, I don't know how many shows in creamed honey, and I'm yet to win a prize. It's a tough one. The finer the grain or candied honey that you start with, the better, or the finer grain that your creamed honey will be. So creamed honey is all about the feel on the tongue, okay? So if you've got a really coarse candied honey, it will feel gritty in your mouth. If you've got a nice fine creamed honey, it's smooth and silky. So when we're making creamed honey, we're almost looking for mixing it, we're almost looking for the consistency of condensed milk as a sort of that you're looking for. There's virtually no grain in it at all. It's just as fine as you can get it. So you can mix it for a long time, or you can mix it quickly for a short time. Long time slow, quick time short, whatever suits you to get that fine grain, okay? Colour should be white, or as white as possible, and no separation. And when I say no separation, because you are mixing a candied and a runny honey to create creamed honey, it needs to go in the fridge for an absolute minimum of 2 weeks to let that candying process take place through the jar, because if it's not totally candied and you take it out of the fridge, send it down to Homebush for the Royal Agricultural Society show and it's 38 degrees, the honey will melt and the actual will separate, and you'll end up with a jar that's got candied honey and runny honey in it, and that's one of your low scorers, okay? They just don't score, the judges don't like it. So no separation in your honey. So other classes of honey judging, there's beeswax, there's candles, there's a lot to do with beeswax with shows. Beeswax will do your head in, okay? Simple as that. Don't boil it. Whenever you're processing beeswax, don't boil it. Anything that you put it in, it will cling to the sides and split as it dries, so you need to, or sets, you need to let it set as slow as possible, put it in the oven, turn it off. Now beeswax melts at 65 degrees Celsius. Try not to heat it anything above 75 degrees Celsius, otherwise you start to change its structure and you lose that lovely waxy, creamy look of the beeswax. You can pick up 2 blocks of wax and you can tell one that's been overheated to one that's been prepared correctly. Pollen's another one. Had a little bit of success with showing pollen. Pollen's judged by the actual number of different colours within a jar of pollen. Now, I think there's about 11 different amino acids in pollen, and not all pollens or not all trees produce pollen that produce all of those amino acids. So having a range of colours within that jar gives you a more complete range of those amino acids. So if you're using pollen as a health food, when you buy pollen that has a lot of different colours in it, okay? Try and stay away from single source pollens, because they might have 5 or 6 different amino acids in there, and that's all you'll get. You won't get those other 5 or 6 that are still available.
Then where do you get that black pollen from?
We believe it comes from a lily. We've got some friends who've got basically a 5-acre garden at Matcham, and we think it's a lily called a hippeastrum, and we think that is where the actual black pollen comes from. So we have pollen grains that are as black as your jacket, and then others that are as white as the page that Mr. Wright's writing on there. So it varies a lot across, and that's what judges are looking for, is an even grain. And processing pollen's fairly involved. You need a dehydrator, you need to willow it to get the dusting. Here's a piece of honeycomb put into a 500-gram jar, so it's like building a sailing ship in a jar. They will give you a specific size that chunk of honey needs to be. It needs to sit in the jar. You're looking for a piece of cut comb or chunk honey that the foundation is in the middle. The jar will have a seam on it, so you line the foundation up with the seam in the jar. So it does your head in, and the piece of honey should stick on the bottom of the jar, not float up to the top under the lid, etc. So anyway, so once you've done all those things, with any luck, you might have some success, and sometimes you'll get lucky enough to win a prize. So from my story, Max and I entered in 2015. We entered the Sydney Royal. It was our first attempt. We had a range of honeys. We sat down, we judged them after we'd done the honey judging course. Sat down, went through them, entered, and we came away with a stack of ribbons. So that was pretty cool. I believe that sometime next year there is going to be another honey judging course run by the RAS down at Homebush.